you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our May faculty development session, Pursuit of Peak Professional Performance by Laurie Baedke. I am Dr. Jessica Seaman, Assistant Dean for Faculty Development in Creighton School of Medicine. I have just a few housekeeping items before we introduce our speaker more fully. This session is being recorded and you will have access to the recording and slide presentation for future reference. We invite you to submit any questions in the chat to everyone or send just to me, and we will get to as many as we can by the end of the session. We do ask that you remain muted with video off unless asking a live question to assist with the recording. Also, this session is eligible for continuing education credit, and you will receive the website and activity code at the end of the session. There is a short survey associated with the continuing education, and we thank you in advance for providing feedback as we continue to build robust programming for our health sciences, faculty, and staff here at Creighton. Now, I am very excited to introduce our presenter, Laurie Baedke. Laurie is a faculty member, Director of Healthcare Leadership Programs, Director of the Executive MBA in Healthcare Management Program, and Assistant Dean of Physician Leadership Education at Creighton University. She has specific expertise in healthcare management, emotional intelligence, and strengths-based leadership. Laurie is also an active mentor and advisor to senior executives, physician leaders, early careerists, and entrepreneurs. She hosts the weekly podcast, the Growth Edge Leadership Podcast. And at age 26, Laurie became the youngest individual to achieve board certification as a fellow of the American College of Healthcare Executives. Her first book, The Emerging Healthcare Leader, a Field Guide, was published in 2015, with the second edition in 2018. We're honored to have Laurie at Creighton University, and we are honored to have her sharing her knowledge and time with us today. So Laurie, if you're ready, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Seaman, and thank you all for joining. I'm really excited to be able to spend this hour talking about the pursuit of peak professional performance, and it's my deep belief, and I think that you will find as we walk through some of the literature that supports these topics that I'll be presenting, that the practices of mentorship and sponsorship and coaching are all important competencies that lead to peak professional performance. And it's also my deep belief that these practices of mentorship and sponsorship and coaching are bidirectional. And what I mean by that is that at every single season of our career, we need to be well mentored, we need to be well sponsored, and we need to be well coached. And as leaders, as professionals, we are called upon to mentor others, to sponsor others, and to coach others. And so it's my objective in the time that we have together today to define these practices, these terms for you, to point you to some of the evidence-based research that helps us to understand them and the outcomes that they drive, and then to give you some practical applications so that you can walk away and put it into practice, perhaps yet today, if not very, very soon in your leadership journey. As Dr. Seaman said, we'll be keeping an eye on the chat box. I will be asking you to pop in there and share some responses with me at 1 or 2 points. And then I hope that we can have a little bit of Q&A at the end. So let's start with those definitions. These 3 practices, mentorship, sponsorship, and coaching. I'm going to give you 3 different layers of definitions so that we're starting with a really holistic and thorough understanding of what these terms mean. I forgot. I love to share this quote from Dr. Kimberly Manning. Some of you may know or know of Dr. Manning. She just passed this week on Twitter 100,000 followers, and she is certainly a voice worth following. She's a full professor of internal medicine at Emory University, where she's the Associate Vice Chair of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and she practices at Grady Hospital. She says this: good mentors help us to get close to our full potential. And isn't that the case? I think that we all stand on the shoulders of giants as it pertains to those who have poured into us. And good mentors, great mentors, are the ones that help to stretch us just a little bit closer to our potential, opening up that capacity which contributes to peak professional performance. Now, as promised, how about those definitions? So a mentor is someone who has knowledge and shares it with you. That probably reconciles very quickly with what you have understood mentoring to be and what mentoring has looked like. It's someone who has experience or expertise and can share of it with you. A sponsor is someone who has power and will use it for you. A sponsor is someone who probably holds a position of influence. Almost always, a sponsor is someone who already has a mentoring relationship with you, such that they've gotten to know you, they've been grooming you, developing you, pouring into you, imparting that knowledge and sharing it with you. And then every once in a while, they activate in a way that allows them to endorse you, recommend you, say your name in a room where you are not, to appoint you, or in some other way help to advance you. And a coach is someone who has expertise and uses it to train you or teach you. A second way to look at each of these roles, a mentor is someone who talks to you. A sponsor is someone who talks about you. Again, they're in a room where you probably are not able to be. They're saying your name, they're sliding your name across the desk, they're endorsing you, they're going to bat for you, they're nominating you, or they're suggesting that you're deserving of a stretch role or a plum opportunity. A coach is someone who has the ability to provide you feedback or asks questions to help to guide you to growth or discovery. And I want to point your attention to that one unique difference that is between mentoring and coaching. These two practices are very, very, very similar. But really, one of the biggest differentiators is that mentors speak to you. They have expertise or experience and wisdom to impart, and they speak to you. One of the things that really, really effective coaches do very, very well is that they either prescribe an action, they're teaching so that you're performing the action, or they're asking questions. They're not necessarily just giving you the answer, but they want to nudge you toward the self-discovery of finding that answer for yourself. And then that last way that I want you to think about these three roles, mentoring is developmentally driven. Sponsoring is advancement driven. It's motion in your career. And coaching is performance driven. So with those definitions in mind, let's dig in a little bit to how we can think more holistically about these three roles and why they're important. Again, these are leadership practices that are bi-directional at every single season of our career. We need the expertise and experience of others to help to guide us. We're being well mentored. We want or need individuals to open doors for us, to be recommending us, endorsing us, giving us plum opportunities. And we need folks to coach us, to give us valuable feedback, to ask us the tough questions that guides us toward our own development. But as leaders or as professionals, we're also turning around and imparting those same roles in our practice as leaders. And we can think more holistically about the ways that these roles each show up. Think about traditional mentors. It's probably the first thing that popped into your mind when you're thinking about a mentor. You're thinking about someone who has mentored you. They're more experienced, they're senior to you in your discipline or in your practice. Perhaps you trained under them. They're senior to you in age and experience, and they're a traditional mentor. But don't overlook the value of peer mentors. Think about your colleagues, your partners, those individuals from across campus or across our two campuses, as it were now. They're people that you trained with, but by golly, they're the person that you send a text to. They're your phone a friend. They're the person you shoot the bat signal up to. Even though they're not any older than you, they may hold a different role, or perhaps they're a little senior to you in terms of how they've progressed. But peer mentors, colleagues are so, so important. This is the iron sharpens iron principle of having someone who will pace you, challenge you, hold you accountable, encourage and exhort you. Peer mentors are so valuable. How about reverse mentors? How often have you perhaps, in your role as a faculty member, gleaned a lesson from one of your trainees? You're picking something up that's maybe generationally unique or racially or ethnically or culturally unique to you. These are ways that the gift goes to the giver when we're investing in mentoring. I'll teach you a little bit later this hour about mentoring teams and constellations, the ways that we can find groups that can be a part of our formation. And of course, like I said, a mentor plus is a sponsor. This is someone who's actually going to bat for you, advocating. They're your ally. They're your champion. So think really holistically about mentorship. It goes far beyond that traditional role. And certainly, as we advance in our career and as we ascend in leadership, it becomes more and more challenging to get access to mentors and sponsors and coaches, but it's more and more important that we get that feedback, right? We live in an academic organization. It's a part of our role day in and day out to be training future clinician leaders and future clinicians. But we know that once we depart that as a trainee, it becomes more and more challenging and more infrequent that we actually get meaningful feedback, that we get really objective and valuable feedback or counsel or insight about how we're doing. And frankly, if we want to perform at the highest level professionally, and if we want to prepare ourselves to level up in leadership, we want to be developed and groomed and prepare ourselves to demonstrate that capacity or potential, we need to seek out mentors and sponsors and coaches who can hone that growth within us. Why is mentorship, sponsorship, and coaching of value? I'm going to give you a couple of examples. There are some workplace outcomes that we want very, very most. And you probably see evidence of this in the teams that you work in, both within our institution and in the clinical arena in which you practice, perhaps. But according to research from the Conference Board, one of the top challenges that CEOs have is improving the effectiveness of their frontline and first-time managers. Think about those supervisors, managers, directors that you interact with on the floor at the hospital, or that your trainees are interacting with, or that are a part of our team here within our own institution. Frontline leaders, first-time managers represent the largest population of leaders in organizations, and many, if not most, are managing for the first times in their careers. They directly lead the most people in any organization in terms of number of direct reports or roll-up reports. They are the pipeline for future leadership roles when we're thinking about bench strength. Who's ready to, say, put me in coach? This is the pipeline. This is the business case for why we need to be investing in mentorship and coaching and sponsorship. Those frontline leaders and first-time managers are the leadership bench strength of any organization. A recent survey by careerbuilder.com said that 58% of new managers receive absolutely no formal training or development at all before they transition into that first leadership role. 26% of first-time managers felt they were not necessarily ready to lead, and 20% of first-time managers do a poor job according to their subordinates, which is the group of individuals who has the direct line of sight to how it is that they are doing as leaders. Here's a little bit more information. This is all from a publication that came out of the Center for Creative Leadership a few years ago. A survey by Manchester International said that 40% of newly promoted managers fail within the first 18 months. Holy smokes. A 2012 finding from Bearson and Associates said that first frontline managers received the least amount of money or support for training and development. That's probably surprising to no one, because when we think about who we have the ability to send to courses or invest in their academic preparation, or have them have access to a mentor or a coach, or send them to a conference, there's the least amount of money available for staff or first-time managers. And research at the Center for Creative Leadership, which is a national consultancy based out of Colorado, has uncovered that 50% of managers, half, are regarded as incompetent disappointments, the wrong hires, or failures. But According to another study I've known of for quite some time out of our very own Omaha-based Gallup organization, your relationship with your direct supervisor for any employee is the single most influential relationship that predicts your ability to perform at a high level and be engaged and sustain employment in that role. Here's research that shows as well what access to allies results in. When individuals are well mentored in the workplace, when they feel like they have a leader, maybe it's their direct supervisor or someone else, maybe it's a peer, maybe it's a team. So again, think holistically about how mentorship shows up. Individuals who are mentored in the workplace achieve really, really valuable outcomes. They're better prepared for promotions, and then they have higher success rates when they do move up. Again, they've been developed, they've been groomed. This is the master-apprentice relationship that is prototypical of mentorship. Those individuals who are well mentored in our organizations stay longer. They feel valued, don't they? They feel more satisfied with their jobs and their careers, probably because they have a really objective sounding board and they have someone helping them to navigate, figure out where their niche is. They rate higher on performance measures. They're perceived as more innovative and creative. This is so important. Think about how much we need to adapt to change. Think about how many risks we need to take on the course of any given day in the realm of decision making, in thinking about how to adjust a process because something in our arena has changed. Maybe it's a supply chain challenge. Maybe it's a workforce challenge. We're short-staffed. Something else is disrupting us. And we need to take a risk. We need to get creative. We need to improvise. Think about someone who has the support of having a sounding board, a team member, that phone a friend, that bat signal recipient. Those individuals who are well mentored, who have access to someone who's available to just kind of, I'm going to toss this against the wall, see if it sticks. If I know that I can call a mentor with a tough question because I have to make a really quick decision, I'm going to be a lot more innovative and creative and probably a lot more risk tolerant if I am well mentored in the workplace. They show higher resilience to setbacks. And setbacks, as we all know, are incredibly inevitable. They are just not a matter of if, but when. And those individuals who are better mentored in the workplace have stronger networks. They have more people around them who they feel they can ask, and they're more apt to ask them. This study that was published about a decade ago, a little over a decade ago, is a really, really superb meta-analysis of over 15,000 studies on mentoring. This took place over 2 decades, from 1985 to 2006. So a very, very substantial meta-analysis. And when they analyzed what outcomes result from mentorship in the workplace, we found that there are 6 really, really fantastic outcomes by category: behavioral prowess and behavioral performance, attitudinal performance, health or well-being related performance, relational, emotional connections, social connections, team connections with others, motivational outcomes, and overall career outcomes. Mentoring is significantly correlated with favorable direction in this broad diversity of categories that I'm certain, as I look at that list, I want to feel like I have a sharp saw in my toolkit on all of those fronts. And I'm guessing that you do as well. And if you lead teams, I'm guessing you want to work with people who show up and bring very, very sharp saws to the table as it comes to these categories. Mentoring cultures, when we are able to embed mentoring activities within our team and collective and organizational or institutional cultures, they drive very, very valuable outcomes. Again, these reflect what we saw in the former study I mentioned a moment ago: better retention or more sustainability in the longevity of employment of our team members, more loyalty and commitment among employees, stronger succession planning. Again, as a leader or as an executive, thinking about who sits on your bench, who's ready to be called up when needed, more organic mentoring, more sustainable mentoring, as you'll see in a few moments, stronger developmental networks at work and at large. And then this might be one of the very most important, greater inclusion and belonging of women and persons of color in our workplace, which is so incredibly important. So when we think about why mentoring is important, I don't think any of us would argue that it's not. But unfortunately, this is about what a day-to-day looks like, isn't it? We find ourselves just grinding. We're just hauling the rocks, and we don't realize someone's got a better way. If we took a quick break and asked a clarifying question or sought counsel and wisdom and insight from someone who's been there, done that, or has a different vantage point on where we're at or what we're doing, we might realize, ta-da, there is so much a better way. And if we invest that small amount of time that seems monumental because we simply have no bandwidth for anything else, think about how much future potential or capacity or margin that might open up in the way that we do what we do if we seek expert outside counsel. So this is where I'm going to ask you to either come off of mic for a moment or hop into the chat box and just tell me. Let's take a quick pulse check. What are the ways that mentorship and sponsorship have provided value in your career journey? I'm going to keep my eye on the chat box for a minute. I'm going to encourage you again, if anyone would like to raise their hand, turn on their video, turn on their mic, share a little bit of a sound out about what it is that mentorship or sponsorship or coaching has provided you by way of value throughout the course of your career. I'm patient. I'll wait. I need to hear at least one or two examples. Encouraged career advancement before I thought I was ready. That is fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that, because that is a really, really superb example of what a mentor will do. They will nudge you in the direction of feeling like you're ready for something before you're ready. Because if we're all honest, none of us is ever perfectly wholly baked before we take on some leadership. Mentorship has been invaluable, gotten me where I am now. Amen. I think everyone would probably agree with that. I've had a chance to participate in reverse mentorship with faculty physicians that I coordinate with. Good for you. That's fantastic. And I'm sure that they find that insight and contribution to be incredibly invaluable. Sponsorship has offered growth when I didn't even realize it was happening. Yep. Mentoring is usually seen and heard. Sometimes sponsorship happens behind the scenes. Absolutely. And you're right, Jessica. So often we are blind to, again, most of sponsorship happens somewhere where we can't be, but it is so helpful to have someone willing to go to bat for you. A sponsor chose me for an interim leadership position I hadn't imagined I would achieve, and then encouraged me in that position. Yes, thank you, Dr. Bittner. Yep, my mentor has always said, feel the fear and do it anyway. Yeah, I mean, the unfortunate reality is that sometimes all mentors are doing is validating that hard is normal. It's not necessarily a rose-colored glasses perspective that they're imparting, but they're really just encouraging me to realize that if it feels hard, you're doing it right. Good job. Guided me toward a specific leadership role that I would not have otherwise considered. That's really, really terrific. Thank you for sharing. Thank you all for hopping in the chat box and reporting out. I really appreciate those diverse comments, and Dr. Seaman will be keeping an eye on that chat box as I continue to progress, but it's really helpful to hear your voices as a part of this presentation as well. Let's continue on. Here's what I mentioned in terms of, this is very performance and developmentally oriented. It's advancement oriented, but there is also a very, very crucial byproduct of investing in mentorship, sponsorship, and coaching. And that is that it drives diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in our organizations. There's a lot of really superb research from two gentlemen, Dr. Brad Johnson and Dr. David Smith. We actually just had the great pleasure of hosting Dr. Brad Johnson on campus a week ago Monday here in Omaha to be the morning workshop presenter for our 4th annual Emerging Leader Symposium. And both of these gentlemen are retired military executives, both terminally prepared. They teach now respectively at the U.S. Naval Academy and Johns Hopkins, and they have written 2 books. I know Dean Dunlay is strongly encouraging the use of both of them. They're fantastic. Athena Rising, How and Why Men Should Mentor Women, and then Good Guys. And in their research, most of it centered within healthcare and academic medicine, they found that when women are mentored by men, they make more money, they get more promotions, and they have better career outcomes. And it's not because men are more effective mentors. There's no evidence to substantiate that there's any difference in the capacity or performance of mentorship by men or women, but it is still because the data bears out that men simply hold more of the power, a disproportionate portion of the power in our organizations. It's our reality in healthcare at large. It's certainly our reality within academic medicine. And it's really important for us to realize that as it pertains to how men can be more effective advocates or allies to help us to advance gender equity and inclusion and belonging within our organizations, a lot of that opportunity rests with men. Yes, absolutely. The names of those books, one of them is on this screen, and they're also on the list of suggested readings you'll be able to access in my copy of the deck. But it's Athena Rising and Good Guys. Those are the 2 books that have been written. They're both within the last 4 years. So very, very recent and very, very research based. You will find them chock full of really, really good, credible, evidence-based literature. And I've included this quote from the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg here because she said, and it is true, if you're going to change things, you have to be with the people who hold the levers. And this is an important truth for us to remember as we are selecting mentors, as we are seeking out sponsors, and as we are putting ourselves in the company of individuals who can coach us. An abundance of literature continues to confirm that women are over-mentored and under-sponsored, unfortunately. There is an abundance of literature I'll point to in a moment, research from Dr. Herminia Ibarra. She is a business school professor at the London Business School and a very frequent contributor to the Harvard Business Review. And she has found that time and again in our corporate environments and in our healthcare environments, we have programs that are intended to mentor women, but it doesn't help women to advance. It helps them to be developed. But until they are activated by an ally, by a champion, by a sponsor, it becomes more and more challenging for women to break into some of those leadership roles. And unfortunately, another research study that was published back in 2016 shows that when women executives advocate for diversity and promote other women, unfortunately, very, very frequently, they receive lower competency and performance ratings, which is really, really unfortunate. So to the men on the call, I will challenge you and encourage you to say that you have a very unique and valuable opportunity to engage as an ally, as a mentor to minorities within our institution and elsewhere to help to change their representation. Dr. Johnson and Dr. Smith really advocate for not just programs that help us to have a mentorship program, but rather to nurture the type of culture that is a mentorship culture. What they have found time and again, and it probably aligns with your experience. I wish we had more time to chat at large about this, but if you're a part of a mentorship program, often those pairings are far too formal and hierarchical. And even the best mentoring programs are usually unlikely to achieve the intended outcomes, especially when the surrounding workplace is competitive and individualistic, which I think is a pretty apt description of an academic medicine institution. By nature, that is the way that our culture exists. So being aware of that and then really considering how can we infuse a mentorship culture into our organizations. I'll give you some takeaways right before the end. Mentorship constellations, as I mentioned, team mentoring, mentorship constellations really reinforces the reality that one single mentor is never going to be sufficient. They're less career enhancing than robust developmental networks or mentoring constellations that help us to gain access to different people for different things in our personal and our professional life. I'll give an example from my very life right now. This Sunday, actually a couple of hours ago, my daughter finished high school. She's done. She's a free bird as of noon Central today. And on Sunday afternoon, she will grab her high school diploma, we'll celebrate her graduation, and I'm going to head toward an empty nest in a couple of years. I've got one more high schooler a couple of years behind his sister, and at some point in time, I'm going to be an empty nester. So you know what my husband and I have been doing over the last couple of months or year or two in anticipation of that? We've been seeking out mentoring relationships with some of the couples that have mentored us in our marriage for a number of years, because we realize that's a massive transition. And for us to well prepare ourselves to hopefully as effectively and gracefully as possible navigate that career from being a parent of children to being a parent of adults, we're seeking out mentorship advice. And there are other ways that we're seeking out counsel in other ways. So again, if I'm thinking, okay, for Laurie Baedke to achieve peak professional performance, I ought to find one mentor. That's hogwash. That's ineffective. Evidence shows that employees prefer mentorships that are authentic, they're reciprocal, where there's mutual character, and that is really hard to achieve in a paired program that is organizationally led. So I want to encourage you to really think, be diverse, be creative, and think about how different mentors play in and out of your life and with which cadence and frequency that they can contribute the very best. A suggestion that Doctors Johnson and Smith give is to really think about being a mentor of the moment. Mentors of the moment help to promote a mentoring culture where all members of the organization, especially those in the middle or upper ranks, intentionally seek out opportunities in daily interactions to develop and grow junior colleagues or peers or the trainees that we interact with. This is a spontaneous, organic way that we just embed these activities into our organizational culture, the way that we do what we do every day. The byproduct of that activity is it increases self-esteem for individuals that are a part of the organization. It increases self-confidence and it increases a sense of belonging. People feel very valued when they are seen, when they're developed, when they are invested in, and these are really, really terrific. And it's a light lift compared to what it feels like to schedule a mentoring conversation versus maybe just a mentor of the moment interaction. And here are some suggestions for what that might look like, just to get very, very practical and granular. Some of these are from Dr. Johnson and Dr. Smith. A couple of them I've added of my own. So here's a phrase you might use. I notice you've been working on or doing great things in X. Well done. So that is just a really simple, it might be when you're walking by someone in the hall, it might be a quick text message that you send. Okay, so how about, I wonder if I could get your take on X. I'd really value your perspective. This is a great way to pick the brain of a colleague or to activate that reverse mentoring principle of, maybe it's someone who has a unique set of experience or perspective that you can really, really value what they bring to the table. How about this one? The hiring committee sure got it right bringing you on board. Now, how can we keep you here, right? Again, none of these is probably going to spawn a full 30 or 40 or 45 or 60-minute conversation, but rather, these are just these spontaneous, as you pass, but thoughtful and intentional ways that you can allow someone to feel seen, see invested in, and then it just opens the door or it sets the table for there to be more interaction on an ongoing basis. Here's a developmentally oriented question that can then move into a sponsorship activation. How about this? In a perfect world, what would you like to be doing in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? How can I make that happen? This is a superb question for us to ask when we're in our mentoring role, but knowing that we just want to get some seeds planted so we know how we can sponsor someone in the future. And then this is one that I use really, really intentionally, because for those of you who know me, you know that I strap a rocket to my backside every day and I take off. And most people who see me here on campus or elsewhere, they just feel like, wow, Laurie's so busy. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to bother her. But here's what I say so that I give others permission to make sure to engage me. I say, I know I keep a really busy pace, but I want to be available to you. Drop me a note. Let me know how I can be a sounding board. Put yourself on my calendar at a cadence that best meets your need, because I want to make sure that I remove that barrier and help people to realize that, yes, I'm very busy. Yeah, you're gonna see that and it's real, but that does not diminish the fact that it is a strong priority to be available to those people that I need to be available to, my direct reports, my mentees, my students, my advisees. Some of you are on this call today. And so this is just a way that I break down that perceived barrier, because in mentoring relationships, there's almost always, especially in the traditional ones, a power differential, right? And we want to make sure that people who we want to have access to us and feel permission, feel like we're very approachable, have those barriers diminished or lessened. Because I would be crushed if I thought that a mentee didn't want to bother me, because I absolutely want to be available to my mentees and to my advisees. So what are those steps? How do we infuse a mentoring culture into the DNA of our teams, our colleges, our campuses, our institutions at large? A great idea is to make sure that you're just talking about successes. Again, a couple of those mentor of the moment statements were just recognition, just sprinkling an attaboy or an attagirl or an I see you in there. And that matters so much, because sometimes all we need is just that validation of knowing that someone appreciates and someone's seeing me and I'm on the right path. And I know that they'll grab me and kind of pull me aside and tell me if that's not the case. To build an effective and sustainable mentoring culture, it's incredibly important that we ensure clarity and transparency and accountability. It is very, very important, and I wish we could go into it in more depth, the importance of trust and psychological safety in mentoring and sponsoring and coaching conversations. As you well know, when you've been in the role as a mentee and when you've been a mentor, you know that you need to have fertile soil for vulnerability, for candor, for tough feedback, for hard disclosures. And so we need to have that clarity of the objectives of any conversation, but then transparency and discipline and psychological safety that helps us to allow for hard conversations to take place. We need to make sure that we give and take feedback. Again, as we traverse our career, certainly as we advance, people think, oh, well, so-and-so's already, advanced from assistant professor to associate professor. Surely he or she doesn't even need any feedback anymore. That's not true. We all need feedback. And if we think that someone doesn't need to hear something, we're fooling ourselves. And if we think that we don't need to seek out feedback, we are very likely on the thin ice that leads us to having blind spots or biases that can really, really get in our way and hamstring our high performance and our ability to be seen as ready for a leadership opportunity. We need to hire and promote future mentors. We need to make that practice of mentorship front of conversation when we're thinking about recruiting individuals into leadership roles, into faculty roles, because we want a mentorship-rich culture here in our institution, and so that it is part of the culture that best trains our alumni, our trainees as they go out into the world. We need to routinely assess that mentoring culture, take a finger on the pulse, know what our expectations are and what growth we need to achieve, and then find ways to assess for it, measure it, and then manage it. And then, of course, we need to reinforce and reward those mentoring behaviors. We need to be talking about it in our team meetings and making sure that we're hearing each other mention how we're seeking out mentoring And that might give someone else the encouragement to say, oh, well, if Laurie's got a mentor, I should probably have a mentor. So I want to talk really briefly also about that practice of coaching. And some of you might be familiar with this article that was published just over a decade ago. Dr. Atul Gawande had a pretty popular, very, very widely distributed article that was written in the New Yorker about his experience in seeking out a coach. And he really became convinced at a stage in the middle of his career that he was seeing that if, individuals like elite athletes and the most high performing singers or the Yo-Yo Ma's of the world and the Rafa Nadals of the world had a coach, what could he benefit from having a coach? And in it, one of his quotes said, coaches are not teachers, but they teach. They're not your boss, but they can be bossy. They don't even have to be good at a sport. The famous Olympic gymnastics coach, Bella Caroli, couldn't do a split if his life depended on it. Mainly they observe, they judge, and then they guide. And he talked about how in his surgical practice, he had already at that point in time really well established himself as a very competent surgeon. But when he invited a senior surgeon in to observe him for a series of cases over a series of days and weeks, the subtle, small, but incredibly impactful observations and insights that were gleaned from that individual's vantage point on his cases was incredibly impactful to help him to not only impact the outcomes that he could achieve, but also the contributions of his entire operating suite team around him. And so when it comes to why coaches are important, this quote from his article, few can achieve and maintain their very best performance on their own. It's why so many of us often achieve so much more accountability in a workout routine. For example, if we are doing personal training and we have someone who is giving us feedback, cueing us, prescribing a workout that we probably wouldn't choose for ourselves, but what do? We pay really good money to have someone kick our tail because it is something that we will achieve even more. Or from that vantage point on your golf swing or your tennis backhand or the form on your bicep curl or your bench press. The input and the expert counsel of someone who can see from outside looking in with objectivity that we almost always lack of our own performance, that in and of itself is the essence of why coaching is incredibly valuable. That process and practice of seeking and acquiring feedback enables our high performance. So a couple of lists in closing here, and then I'll open up for question and answer. When is it that we need mentorship, sponsorship, and coaching? Well, the first answer might as well be the entire list because it is, and why is my slide not advancing here? Shoot. Well, the first bullet on the list is supposed to be always, because we absolutely always need mentorship. And I'm not sure why there it is. So it's always, we always need to be well mentored. We always need to be well sponsored and well coached. Like I said, it's a very bi-directional process. But if we're also looking for examples, certainly in times of career transition, if you're onboarding into a new role, into a new organization, those are really prime times to seek out the objective counsel and sage wisdom of others. We definitely need to seek mentorship and coaching in times of adversity, because when we're in a down cycle, if we're in a slump, if we've had a really adverse experience or outcome, we really need that objective counsel, the encouragement perhaps, and the exhortation and the accountability to get back on the horse. And also conversely, when we're in an upcycle, when we're experiencing a lot of success, it might be a really good time to seek out the input and the counsel of someone who can pour into you, who can help to hone and refine your perspective or your performance in a really valuable way. Also, when we think about what barriers exist, and I'm not sure, I wonder if something's up with my slides because I feel like they're kind of sticky wicket right now. Yes, there will be a copy of the slides posted to Blue Line after the fact. What are the barriers? And again, here, I mean, this first one could be the start and the end of the list, because I think number one on the list is always time. There's never enough time. I think I would be really stunned if all of you on this list didn't say that you really do thoroughly enjoy mentoring. You probably wouldn't be in an academic institution if you did not. But time and tasks get in the way. Certainly also training and resources are a challenge. Sometimes we don't feel like we're necessarily perfectly well equipped to mentor or coach or sponsor others. And so sometimes we stay on the sidelines a little bit too long. Also, I will acknowledge that, and the writings of Dr. Smith and Dr. Johnson really confirm this. It's one of the barriers that exists between our mentoring and sponsoring and coaching individuals who don't look like us, whether it's individuals or of another race or ethnic background, of another gender, of another generation. These barriers that exist, some of them real and some of them perceived, are opportunities for us to seek out training and make sure that we can kind of overcome those barriers. I mentioned the importance of trust and psychological safety. Privacy and confidentiality is incredibly important in mentoring and coaching relationships, and it has to be protected at all costs. And then one of the other barriers to really effective mentorship is unconscious or implicit bias. What are those blind spots or biases that might exist that might be keeping me from being a really effective mentor or coach to whomever it is that I'm in a relationship with? So understanding that barrier, assessing for it, and then managing for it is part of the obligation as I show up in mentoring relationships. So as we kind of bring it to a close, I want to point us one more time just to the importance of the fact that when we are activating as mentors, I am invariably reminded that the gift goes to the giver. And hence I've shared this Walt Whitman quote, "The gift is to the giver and comes back to him, it cannot fail." It's very easy to see mentoring and coaching as an output, and it absolutely is. It's a task. It takes time. But on the other hand, I am almost always walking away feeling so rejuvenated, so refilled, and it's a meaningful transaction. Often I'm reminded, even in my own words, of foundational truths that were just the exact dose of medicine that I needed. In giving counsel or advice to a mentee or a coachee, I'm actually hearing what it is that I exactly needed to point my attention to. So the gift absolutely goes to the giver as it pertains to our investing in mentoring relationships. And so as I bring this to a close, here are just a couple of important reminders. Just those definitions of these roles: mentor, sponsor, coach. What are the unique objectives of each of these practices, and how do they show up and why? Mentorship, all of these practices, mentorship, sponsorship, and coaching, are bidirectional. We should be well mentored, be well sponsored, be well coached at every single stage of our career. And we are almost inevitably going to be called on to be a mentor, to be a sponsor, and to be a coach of others. And mentorship drives really, really valuable outcomes: self-awareness, growth, a performance orientation, engagement in the workplace, and a clarity of purpose and a greater sense of well-being. And so when these slides go up, you'll see some suggested readings, among them the two books at the top from Drs. Johnson and Smith. My bibliography is attached, and as Dr. Seaman mentioned, also the CME Tracker website link, which is also available to you in the chats. And so with that, I see a couple of things in the chat box, and I welcome any questions or engagement you might seek out.
Laurie, thank you so much. As people are adding some questions in there, I just want to thank you so much for giving us your knowledge, sharing some strategies for creating growth, not just in ourselves, but in those around us. And I love the differentiation between mentorship, sponsorship, and coaching. Sometimes we may think of those as very similar, and there's some similar parts to them, but I love how you really pulled the differences out in all three of those. And then there's a really great question from the beginning from Dr. Ceballos that asked about the transferability of coaching. So he says the AMA is doing great emphasis in coaching students in the clinical environment. So our M3s and our M4s and also residents. Do you think that coaching can also be applied to basic sciences?
I really do think it can be. So when we think about that imparting of knowledge, I really think about it in the master apprentice and really purely in the teaching context. And so regardless the discipline, I do think that it has some really robust applicability. And it also, if we approach it in a really healthy way, of kind of that humble inquiry and the openness to curiosity and questions, it can really nurture that type of exchange and formation that is the most ideal circumstance, whether it's in clinical medicine, at each stage of the transition through the life cycle of our trainees, and in that discernment of which path one might choose, and then how they hone the skill set requisite to perform at a high level in that discipline.
And I think it brings up a good point as well, as we focus so much now on IPE, that interprofessional education, crossing all health sciences, crossing into other disciplines. I feel like you could even have a mentor or a sponsor from a different program than what you're working in, right?
Yes. Well, and I think that as you all could likely attest, there is value to be gleaned from the multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary approaches and perspectives of others within the continuum of our healthcare teams. And it might not be apples to apples, but it is that really reflects our work teams. And I think that developmental environment or ecosystem that's certainly nurtured within our organizations. It's the case within the executive MBA program that I lead, that we have physicians, we have nurses, we have APPs of a variety of different disciplines, and we have non-clinician leaders. And these folks are from large health systems, for-profit healthcare, nonprofit, academic medicine, rural healthcare, and everything in between. And that richness of perspective is really, really valuable in our personal and professional formation.
I love that. Thank you. I do not see any other questions. We'll give it just a minute or two if anybody else has questions or comments. We've got lots of thank yous and inspiring talk, excellent talk. And I would agree as well, Laurie.
Well, thank you. It is absolutely my pleasure. And as well, my contact information is included here. You're welcome to seek me out. I'm, of course, in the Creighton email system. And if there's ever anything else that I can do to lend aid to any of your journeys, please don't hesitate to reach out. But allow me also to just say thank you for this opportunity today. And thank you for everything that each of you do within our institution and for the betterment of our trainees and our communities.
All right, seeing no other questions, we'll go ahead and end it, but just one more big thank you, Laurie. We really appreciate you, and we're honored to have you as part of our Creighton family. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Be well.